book of Daniel. We're excited about it. You know, the book of Daniel literally was written for us. It's written for the people who would be alive, specifically of the remnant that would be alive in the final generation, when that great beast would emerge and take over control of the whole world. Daniel and his three companions were like us, like the remnant scattered through all of the Gentile nations. They didn't belong there. They were different. And somehow, when this great beast would emerge and take over the world, as Babylon did in the time of Daniel, they would need to continue to be faithful to Jehovah, the one and only true God, while there was tremendous pressure that would be put on them to conform to the ways of the beast system. Now, we tend to think this is a new thing. For instance, when we read in the book of Revelation about the beast that is to emerge in these final days that will rule over the whole world, we tend to think that's a last days thing. And yes, in its final form it is. And this is the very worst expression of it that is soon to come upon the world. However, this has been going on for a long time. And Daniel and his three friends in Babylon set an example for us and are an encouragement for us that even as we know we will see this beast emerge and take over the world, it doesn't matter where you live. Do you understand that? The beast is going to take over the whole world. Many of you think you can go and hide out in the country somewhere, that you can choose some rural location and somehow get off the grid and the beast will not know about you. Have you heard of satellites? High technology? The answer for us is not in becoming survivalists. It's not in what we know. Yes, some of those things might help us. I'm not saying that that's all bunk. But the real answer is not in what we know. The real answer is in who we know. Let's see that as we look at Daniel chapter 3. Now, this is a favorite chapter. People love this story. This is real big with Sunday schools. Daniel chapter 3. Sometimes I wonder if they really know what this story is about. That this story is about something that soon all of us will be facing. Let's read the first verse. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now let's think about this statue. The Hebrew cubit is about 18 inches. So according to the Hebrew cubit, this image of gold at 60 cubits high would have been 90 feet in height. 90 feet. However, the Babylonian cubit was 3 fingers higher. That's about 3 inches more. That is enough to push the height of this statue of gold over 100 feet in height. This statue was placed in the plain of Dura. In other words, this is a plain. This is a extensive, flat valley. Why was it put there instead of in a temple? Let's read the next verse. Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So I'm wanting to ask you to picture this in your mind. This giant golden statue over 100 feet in height, sparkling in the sun on the plains of Dura. All of the rulers of the Babylonian Empire assembled there before that giant statue. One of them was missing, and his name was Daniel. He's not in the story. This leads me to believe, since he was a high-ranking official of the empire, we found that out in chapter 2, that he was no doubt traveling on the business of the empire, so that he was not included. But as we will find out, his 3 companions were included. Well, let's just talk about this scene a little more before we go into what actually happened here. Why would all of these leaders and rulers of Babylon be assembled before this image in the plain of Dura on the dedication day of the image? Well, they were all the dignitaries, weren't they? They were all the leaders of the nation. This was just the day this all started. It had to start with the leaders. What would happen after this day when all the leaders returned to wherever they were from? Then it would go down to all of the people, wouldn't it? You know, for thousands of years, government and religion have been intimately connected. People who live in the United States, where supposedly there's a separation of church and state, don't fully understand about this phenomenon of how religion and the state have worked together down through time. And you will see with every major empire that they have always had a state religion. And the state religion is the source of the unity within the empire. That's what this is about. Now, there's a little more that we can learn about this. I want to share a quote from Gill's commentary, who in turn is quoting from the Talmud. This is some historical material from the Talmud. And it's probably based on real historical information, and not all of this information is available to us today. But here's what it says. Although the design of that generation was not accomplished, that is, the generation that built the Tower of Babel, that's what it's talking about. Although the design of that generation was not accomplished, yet after their times, their punishment was made manifest, in that they said, "Let us make us a name." For Nebuchadnezzar, having wasted and subverted many kingdoms and destroyed the sanctuary, thought it possible to put in execution the wicked design of the age of the dispersion. Hence it is said, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image, etc., and set it up. What they're suggesting in the Talmud is that the incident we're reading about here was an incident where King Nebuchadnezzar had become obsessed with the fact that he was the ruler of the world. And he was hearkening back to the Tower of Babel. And he thought that he himself had become so great that he would be able to subvert what the Creator had done at the Tower of Babel in dividing the peoples. And that he would use this gold image as a means to unite all the peoples of the world. This is what the Talmud is saying about this. Let's read a little bit more. This is in the Valley of Generation. That's what the Valley of Dura means, generation. This is where a new world order was being generated by Nebuchadnezzar. In the province of Babylon. Notice it's not the city of Babylon, it's the province of Babylon, which is a much bigger area. Just like, for instance, in New York, you have the city of New York, but then you have the state of New York, which is much, much larger than the city. Well, that's how this was. It goes on and it says, which is the valley spoken of in Genesis 11:2. In other words, this is the same valley where the Tower of Babel had been raised, or was attempted to be raised when it had been foiled. And Nebuchadnezzar was wanting to finish what had been frustrated. What therefore they could not do, he attempted to do. Hence he gathered all the people to worship the image, which agrees with Genesis 11:4. For he put a certain vessel of the vessels of the temple on the mouth of the image, on which was engraven the divine name, that he might render ineffectual the intention of the dispersed generation. Imagine that. What the Talmud is saying is he actually took a holy implement from the temple on which the divine name was and put it in the mouth of the image, essentially now blending the worship of the one and only true God with this image in an attempt to bring that worship under the authority of the image. thinking that that would break the power that had prevented Babel from being built. Let's read some more. But Scripture says in Jeremiah 51:44, "And I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he has swallowed up, and the nations shall not flow together any more unto him." I bet you didn't know there was a scriptural basis for this, did you? It's a prophecy in Jeremiah. "For Daniel came and caused that vessel that was swallowed to be taken out of the mouth of the image, whence it fell and was broke to pieces, which is the same as that in Genesis 11:4. So this is a very interesting account of what happened. We have no scriptural record that tells us that Daniel did this, but we do know that Nebuchadnezzar ultimately failed. That as great as the kingdom of Babylon became, it itself was destroyed. It did not accomplish gathering all the nations into one eternal empire. But that was, in fact, the goal, and it's not hard to see that from the text here. Because Babylon was a polytheistic society. There were many gods in Babylon. And apparently, Nebuchadnezzar didn't care that people worshiped other gods, so long as they worshiped the state god. Friends, that is how it's going to be. There will be many Christians. There will be many Jews. There will be many people that claim to worship the God of the Bible who do just fine under the reign of the Antichrist, because they will be willing to worship the state god too. Well, let's imagine now all these leaders standing before this image. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." You see, this command is not just for the leaders, is it? It's through the leaders to all the people of all the languages, trying to reverse the Tower of Babel. That at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. This is a great national anthem that is going to be played with all of these different instruments. Really a great orchestra that was being assembled. And this is an incredibly intimidating sight, if you can just imagine this. You know, most of us can imagine when we were kids, maybe being assembled for an assembly in our school. And you might have a few hundred, you might have 1,000 people there. And if you got called on for something in the assembly and you were called up to the front of the assembly, can you imagine how you felt? Can you remember that happening? Just imagine the group pressure that was on this group gathered there in the plains of Dura when this music was played. particularly when they heard this from the herald. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Nobody told you in advance. You didn't know. You couldn't have not come anyway. What are you going to do at that moment? Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Friends, you're reading about the future here. You're reading about the future. That's what's going to happen when this beast finally emerges. It will be demanded that every person will worship the beast. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who bears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you've set up. Do you suppose in these days to come that we may have enemies that might say something very, very similar to this, to those dignitaries of the beast system? You can count on that. These men thought they had something to gain, you see, because if the king would just follow through, there's 3 new posts that are going to open up that some of those people, probably the very ones who are saying this to the king, could then step up into. Because we know that's what these people are all about, isn't it? Getting up another rung on the pyramid. And they will say and do anything to get there. So this is what happened. Now the king is in a certain position here. He may have high regard for these men. But what happens if he makes an exception? Well, then the whole thing falls apart, doesn't it? Then other people might say, well, I worship this other god over here, and so I would like an exception too. Well, it goes on, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? You know, he couldn't believe it. Those people think that everybody has a price. And nobody is so devoted to their God and their beliefs that they will risk their life. And you know why they believe that? Because they would never do it. Well, he continues on. Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. Hey, he's given him another chance. What a nice guy. But if you do not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there that can deliver you out of my hands? He had become God. Think about it. That's what he was saying. I'm God now. There is no God above me. There is no God that can turn around what I have said. That's what he is saying. Is this not the message that we expect to hear from the Antichrist once he is installed into power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." Now that's more than a great Sunday school story. You just imagine the situation. Imagine the degree of the pressure that was on him before the king. What do you think it was like around the king? There are big muscular guys with swords there. There was a big furnace, and it was burning hot. There was a throne. There were courtiers and all kinds of people there. There were all of these officials of the government there. And yet, these men are saying this to the king. Is it because they are so brave? I do think they're brave. But I'll tell you the reason why they did this. Because they were in greater fear of the living and true God than they were in the king of Babylon. And they knew that no matter what he did, he could not touch their eternal hope. What a mistake that would be to throw that all away just to keep the favor of the king and the people. So what they did was not only brave, it was logical when you understand it. And beyond being logical, I think we have to see something else here. And that is, these men were speaking from their hearts. They were keeping the first commandment. Right? Love the true God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. They had a deep love for their God. And they were in covenant with their God. And they were not going to violate that covenant for any reason. And this was not dependent. Notice this. on Yahweh saving them. Sometimes we think like that. We think, okay, I have this deal with Yahweh, and if I do the right thing, then he has to save me. If that's true, then why martyrs? Why do we have martyrs? Right? Why was Yeshua himself crucified for us? Why did all the apostles, save one, die as criminals? Our duty is to glorify our Father in heaven. We do not have guarantees that in every situation he is going to save our life. Now, these were mature believers who understood that. I'm telling you this because you need to know the truth. You can't go into the times that we have ahead of us with some kind of naive religious ideas, because if you do, when those things don't come true, you are going to fall apart. You've got to understand what the truth is here. They understood, and they said, he can save us, but whether he does or not, we're just not going to do it. Yahweh can help us. He can keep us from that moment if he chooses to. He can give us the strength to speak the truth and to endure it. Or he can save us. And whatever he does is just fine because it's his will. And the important thing, victory, friend, victory is being faithful. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. Nebuchadnezzar was done talking. You're not going to do what I tell you? It's over. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. So imagine it. These big burly guys, right? These guards that have a hold of these men, in getting close enough to the fire to try and throw these men into the fire, they themselves were overcome by the heat and killed, so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego then fell into the flames. They're tied up. What can they do about this? What can they do? There is a moment when we understand there's nothing that I can do. That's where they were at. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, "Was it not 3 men we cast bound into the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king." He said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. I will always be with you. That's the promise. Messiah told us before he ascended, I will always be with you. He was there for them. And he's been there for all of them. Have you read about Stephen? Yes, he was killed while having a vision of the Son of God enthroned in heaven. His body was killed, but his spirit was already moved beyond that. If you're truly his, he will always be there for you. You can absolutely count on that. Yes, there are no guarantees that your body will always be saved, but there is a guarantee that he will always be there for you. And he will do exactly what is the right thing to do in your situation. And he will love you because he loved you enough to give his life for you. And when he comes back in glory, you will come back with him. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God. Hey, you know what? He's not the Most High God anymore. Nebuchadnezzar, he's not the Most High God anymore. He's saying now their God is the Most High God. He's had a lesson in humility. And come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. They did that under their own power. They went in all bound up, thrown in or nearly thrown in by these burly guards. But when they came out, they walked out under their own power. That's what Messiah was able to do for them. And the king has a very different attitude now. Now he's willing to listen. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw, in regard to these men, that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their head singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. You know, that day when they went to that plain and they saw the image and they heard the music, they probably thought that was the greatest sight that they could ever see. But they were wrong. Because when the living and true God made his move, that is when they saw the greatest sight they could ever see. That is where the real power is, friends. That is where the real power is. Don't be afraid of the beast system. It can get a little scary watching this thing grow, watching the technology they have and their capabilities. But don't let that wow you too much, because our God has real power. And even those people will have to acknowledge it. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God." This is what's happening. Here's the plan. A one-world religion. It's in the works. And it will be composed of all religious organizations. And they will be allowed to have their separate distinctiveness, as they like to say. But they will all have one thing in common, and that is they will all be worshiping the beast and telling their people to worship the beast. Anybody that doesn't get on board with that is worthy of death. Hey, they're still being polite. You're watching the news and seeing what's happening at this stage. This is just the beginning. They're being polite right now. You wait until they totally have control. When they have their hand right around the neck of the world, you watch and see what happens with believers. They're not going to be any kinder than this man. But they're going to be faced with something they can't imagine. They're going to come face to face with a power that they never thought was real. And they're going to find out that power is real. They're going to come face to face with an immovable object. And just think, the spirit of that all-powerful God lives in you right now. What we're reading about here, you can do. You can do this. I know what you're thinking. Oh, I don't think I can do that. I'm pretty scared. When that moment comes, you will be surprised how the Spirit of the living God will well up inside of you, and you will become a rock. Just be determined that that's who you want to be. And trust him. And should it come to this for you, you will overcome. And you will prove to be stronger than the whole beast system because of the one who lives in you. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. Turned out well. Turned out well for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It always turns out well for the people who put the living and true God first in their life. It's not what you know, friends. It's who you know. Thanks for listening. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom. Beast of Daniel, Surfacing, is our new seminar on the book of Daniel with previously unknown information to give you understanding and knowledge regarding the beast that is about to surface and change the world and change your life. You can participate in this seminar online, absolutely free of charge. To sign up for this is absolutely free. This is being offered as a public service to everyone who needs this information. To sign up and to receive more details, please go to our website at www.tsiyon.org. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with our latest YouTube videos. Please post this video and share it with your friends. Daniel and his three companions were like us, like the remnant scattered through all of the Gentile nations. They didn't belong there. They were different. And somehow, when this great beast would emerge and take over the world, as Babylon did in the time of Daniel, they would need to continue to be faithful to Jehovah, the one and only true God, while there was tremendous pressure that would be put on them to conform to the ways of the beast system. Now, we tend to think this is a new thing. For instance, when we read in the book of Revelation about the beast that is to emerge in these final days that will rule over the whole world, we tend to think that's a last days thing. And yes, in its final form, it is. And this is the very worst expression of it that is soon to come upon the world. However, this has been going on for a long time. And Daniel and his three friends, let's read the next verse. Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So I'm wanting to ask you to picture this in your mind. This giant golden statue, over 100 feet in height, sparkling in the sun on the plains of Dura. All of the rulers of the Babylonian Empire assembled there before that giant statue. One of them was missing, and his name was Daniel. He's not in the story. This leads me to believe, since he was a high-ranking official facing. Let's read the first verse. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now let's think about this statue. The Hebrew cubit is about 18 inches. So according to the Hebrew cubit, this image of gold at 60 cubits high would have been 90 feet in height. 90 feet. However, the Babylonian cubit was 3 fingers higher. That's about 3 inches more. That is enough to push the height of this statue of gold over 100 feet in height. This statue was placed in the plain of Dura. In other words, this is a plain. This is a extensive, flat valley. Why was it put there instead of in a temple? The book of Daniel. We're excited about it. You know, the book of Daniel literally was written for us. It's written for the people who would be alive, specifically of the remnant that would be alive in the final generation, when that great beast would emerge and take over control of the whole world. In Babylon, set an example for us and are an encouragement for us that even as we know we will see this beast emerge and take over the world. It doesn't matter where you live. Do you understand that? The beast is going to take over the whole world. Many of you think you can go and hide out in the country somewhere, that you can choose some rural location and somehow get off the grid and the beast will not know about you. Have you heard of satellites? High technology? The answer for us is not in becoming survivalists. It's not in what we know. Yes, some of those things might help us. I'm not saying that that's all bunk. But the real answer is not in what we know. The real answer is in who we know. Let's see that as we look at Daniel chapter 3. Now, this is a favorite chapter. People love this story. This is real big with Sunday schools. Daniel chapter 3. Sometimes I wonder if they really know what this story is about. That this story is about something that soon all of us will be